Hi, my name's Jerrid. I'm one of the co-founders of Pressboard. And at Pressboard, we love stories. So what we do as a company, we're a tech company, but we help publishers like the Wall Street Journal or Canadian Living. Hundreds of publishers work with brands like Spotify and TELUS and TD, and we help them tell stories, and then our technology measures how well those stories do. But I'm not actually here to talk about Pressboard today. What I want to talk about is how a story could make this balloon dog worth $58 million. It's going to be a weird presentation. But first, a little story about how I got here. So I grew up in the 80s, and the 80s were a hell of a time to be in marketing. Woo! Nike had come out with their Just Do It campaign, what they just celebrated the anniversary of recently in pretty epic fashion. Apple was challenging IBM with their Super Bowl commercial, the 1984 commercial, and Angela Bauer had just hired Tony Michelli to look after her house while she started her very own ad agency on a little show called Who's the Boss? It was a hell of a time to be alive. The thing is when I was a kid, I wanted to be in marketing because of Angela Bauer. Most kids wanted to be a policeman, or they want to be an engineer or a doctor, and I wanted to be Angela Bauer. I was a bit of a weird kid. But the thing was marketing was about telling stories, and I fell in love with this idea that a story could influence someone to change their behavior. But recently, things have changed. We still love stories, but in general, we tend to avoid the advertising behind them. And all you have to do is look at how almost all of us subscribe to Netflix. And Netflix is just a way that you can pay to watch shows and movies without any ads. And if you remember, when Netflix started, it didn't have these huge kind of like series that we would binge watch. It was just old movies, and we were still willing to pay $10 a month to just watch stuff without ads in them. And if you think about articles, we read more articles as humans today than we ever have in our history, and yet 30% of us download an app so that we can read those same articles without banner ads on them. There's something weird going on here. And if you think about flyers, we throw flyers in the garbage all the time, but we'll pay $20 to go watch what is essentially a 2-hour-long Lego catalog. And if any of you have kids, you slowly end up buying every single Lego item that's in that movie. And so something's changing. We still love stories, but we don't like ads. And at Pressboard, half of our team is content experts, but the other half of our team is software engineers and data scientists. And so when we see something like this, we want to understand the science behind it. What's really going on here? So I want you to think for a second about your favorite movie. Have you ever wondered why it is that you fall in love with the hero of a movie? Like you really fall in love with them. You care what's going to happen to them. Why do we care what's going to happen to Saving Private Ryan if he's going to be saved? Why do we care what's going to happen to Forrest Gump? And why do we care if the Barton Bellas are going to win the National A Cappella Championship? These are my 3 favorite movies. I tell you, I'm weird. Weird taste in movies, jobs. But there's something going on here. And what it comes down to is the science behind how our brains work. You see, when you see an ad, or if you read a textbook in school, or if this slide was covered in text, your brain consumes a lot of energy, and it tries to be as efficient as possible. And in order to understand ads, or a textbook, or just a slide full of text, all it needs is 2 areas of the brain. This is called Broca and Wernicke's area, and they're the language processing centers of your brain. And it's all that's required, and so your brain will be as efficient as possible and only use those areas. But when you hear a story, your brain has to activate a bunch of other areas. When we hear the gunshots in Saving Private Ryan, our auditory cortex has to be activated. When we see Forrest Gump run, our motor cortex is activated. Even if we're not running ourselves, your brain uses the exact same areas to be able to comprehend that. And when you hear me talking about my marketing influences from when I was young, your hippocampus will automatically bring up your own memories from when you were young, because as humans, we need stories to compare against each other and to relate to one another. But when you hear an emotional story, something even crazier happens. Your brain releases a drug called oxytocin. And oxytocin is only released in your brain in a few times in your life. It happens in childbirth and milk letdown among women, and it happens during sex. If you want to know the reason behind love, it's oxytocin. And that's actually why it's really hard to have friends with benefits. And the other time that this comes out is when you hear an emotional story, and that's why stories are so powerful. And that's the science behind why you fall in love with a character of a movie and the hero of a movie. And it actually happens with other characters as well. And you form these relationships because us as humans, oxytocin helps us bond, relate, and trust one another. But you might be saying, well, that's fine, but we're not making movies here. We're just trying to sell cars and cell phone plans and get people to sign up for a bank account. So we wanted to take a look at, does this matter when we think about it from a marketing perspective? So we looked at a couple different studies that were done. The first thing that we wanted to find out was, do stories actually increase the value of a product? And so a study was done on this, and it was called the significant objects theory. And it was done by two people, Josh and Rob. What they wanted to find out was, could you change the value of an item simply by adding a story? So what they did was they went out and they bought a lot of random items. They bought them at flea markets, garage sales, bought them online, and these were insignificant objects. They had no historical or emotional value. They bought up all of these and they said, okay, now if we added a story and then we tried to resell them, and they ended up reselling them on eBay, could we increase the value of these items simply by adding a story? And so here's one of the examples. This is just a pepper shaker, like every pepper shaker you've ever seen at every greasy diner, available at every dollar store. And they bought this pepper shaker for 99 cents. And then they added a story about how this pepper shaker was once with a salt shaker, and they were together, and they'd been separated from each other. And all this pepper shaker wanted was to regain that companionship and find another salt shaker to spend its life with. And they put that story, they sold that on eBay, and they sold it for $28. Nothing was different except the story. That's an increase of 2,800% by adding a story to the item. Here's another example. This is a dish, it has pictures of cows on it, and it says from Ireland. There was thousands of these created. It has no significant value. There's no historical value to it whatsoever. But they added a story to it. They talked about how what this dish really represented was the struggles that Ireland has gone through. And it represented how it's come together and how people can gather around the table and talk about that history. They bought this dish for $1. They attached a story, they put it on eBay, and it sold for $41. Nothing had changed except the story. That's an increase of 4,100% by just adding the story to it. Now, they didn't just do this with a couple of items. They did it with 200 different items. They bought these 200 items at flea markets, garage sales, and online for a total of $250. They added a story to each of them. They resold them on eBay for $8,000. That's an increase of 3,200%. And you can imagine, if you could go back to the office today and say, listen, we're not going to change our product at all. I'm just going to add a story to it, and I can get a 3,200% increase. You're probably getting a promotion today. But that's what a story can add. Stories can add value to products and services. Now, these items were all sold by Rob and Josh. They were the storyteller. Now, you have to wonder, does the storyteller matter? Does it matter who is telling the story, not just the story itself? And so to explore that, we wanted to look, again, at how your brain works. So what humans are really good at is pattern recognition. We're not that strong. We stand on our hind legs. We have these big, heavy heads that keep us off balance most of the time. All of our organs are exposed to predators right here. But what we're really good at is identifying patterns, and this is what has kept us alive and succeeding for so long. When we first meet a rabbit, we know that it's safe, and we identify that its patterns are, it's fluffy, it has long ears, cute nose. That means it's safe. The first time we experience fire, we know that this can burn us. It's dangerous. It can be out of our control, so we know that's dangerous. And our minds recognize these patterns, and we lock them in. So we can introduce a brand new object to that, and our brains will be able to figure out whether it's safe or not. So you look at, these are Pokemon characters. I have kids, obviously. You look at Pikachu. Right away, you know the Pikachu's safe, but why? There's no real Pikachus in the world. But what you see, furry animal, long ears, cute nose, that means it's safe. Charizard is the one on the bottom. Charizard is literally breathing and on fire at the time, and so we know that Charizard is dangerous. That's how our pattern recognition minds work. But this doesn't happen. We're not running from lions anymore. We know what berries we're supposed to eat, but we still do this every day when we're buying products and services. So this is Nordic Naturals. They make fish oil. So our pattern recognizing brain knows that they sell fish oil. This is the kitchen. The kitchen is a really popular food site. And we recognize that the kitchen gives us food advice. So when we take a story like this one, Omega-3 101, what are they and why they're important? When that story comes from Nordic Naturals, we recognize that that is selling us fish oil. But by simply changing the storyteller to the kitchen, we recognize that same story as food advice. This is how our pattern recognizing minds work. But I told you that I'd tell you how a story could make this balloon dog worth $58 million. So this balloon dog was created by an artist called Jeff Koons. And you might think, okay, it was sold on auction by Sotheby's for $58 million. It's the highest priced item ever sold in an art auction by a living artist. And you might think, okay, fine. Jeff's, he created this by hand. There's only one of them, but that's not true. There was 4 of them created. And Jeff didn't actually create them himself. He hired designers and engineers and painters to create these for him. And so how did it create this much value? But what happened was that Jeff has a story with his followers and with the art community. And those stories have released oxytocin in his fans and followers. And they trust and they believe in him. And there's a bond that's created, and that increases the value. But the other thing is that it was sold by Sotheby's. And Sotheby's is well known for selling some of the highest priced pieces of art in the world. Picasso's, handwritten books by J.K. Rowling. And because that bond was created with the followers through that oxytocin in the art community, and it was sold by Sotheby's, it changed the value of this balloon dog, which in materials is only worth $3,000, and we could create it right now to the same specs and probably not get our money back, and it increased the value to $58 million. So what I want to leave you with is that the science of storytelling is that our brains are wired for stories. Stories can increase the value of products and services, and the storyteller matters. And that, my friends, is the science of storytelling. Thank you.